On the phone, it's a pleasure to welcome to the program Professor Carl Hart. He is an associate professor of psychology in both the departments of psychiatry and psychology at Columbia University, the director of the residential studies and methamphetamine research laboratories at the New York State Psychiatric Institute, and author of High Price, a neuroscientist's journey of self-discovery that challenges everything you know about drugs and society. Welcome to the program, Professor.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start. Your book is fascinating. It intertwines essentially what is in part, I guess, a memoir and a look at the way that we perceive drugs in society and its relationship to, I guess, the problems that have been attributed to drugs. Let's start with just tell us a little bit about your background, and I'm curious as to why combine these two books, if you will, into one.
Well, so I don't know if you know, but I have a textbook out that's aimed at the college-level students, and it's doing really well, and it's an academic book. It's purely academic, and it's been doing well for a number of years. But the problem is that it doesn't have the wider scope, or the broader scope. And so I combined the personal story here with the academic sort of stuff in order to increase the readership, make it more interesting. People, it's more difficult to get people to read material that's dry. And so I added the personal stuff in order to contextualize drug use, in order to help people to understand that you didn't have to be perfect in order to make a contribution to the society, to make it interesting, I hope.
All right, so tell us a little bit about your story. You grew up in poverty, and tell us just give us a little bit of a sense of what your life was like growing up.
Yeah, I want to also make it clear to people that this isn't an up from slavery story. Sometimes people get hung up on that. The fact is that I grew up in a neighborhood that was considered deprived, but I didn't know it was deprived. It was just how you grew up. I grew up and saw a number of sort of things: drug use. I used drugs, sold drugs, engaged in petty crimes, all those sorts of things. But the major thing that helped me to get out were mentors, athletics, and programs that were sponsored by the federal government that's no longer there. We grew up on welfare aid to families with dependent children. That program is no longer here. So there was a number of sort of things that helped me to become a responsible member of our society today that are not there, structural sort of things. And so one of the reasons I told the story is because it's not a secret how we can move people along, how we can get people help that they need. But we act as if it's some magical formula. It's not. We got rid of those programs.
Yeah, I want to talk about that briefly. I don't want to get too hung up on that, but the aid to children with dependent families was a program that essentially went by the wayside under Bill Clinton's so-called welfare reform, and it is the legacy, or at least in the context of today's politics, this was at the time the sort of the welfare queens that we were told about, and the idea that this type of aid to families, in Paul Ryan's words, creates a hammock as opposed to a safety net. And of course, that's not your experience, and also not the experience of your siblings.
No, that's right, and that's not the experience of the overwhelming people on this sort of program. And there are all kinds of sociological data to show that the majority of people who were on aid to families with dependent children, they go on to become responsible tax-paying citizens. And not only that, the women who are on these programs are only on these programs until their children are no longer children. We've known that for years, but that's not the sort of public image that happened. And we also know there are other programs like our sort of bailout of Wall Street and these other industries far more money than these programs. But that group of people who were on these programs were just easier to vilify.
And to a certain extent, your story in some ways, expand on this and tell me if this is accurate. But in many respects, because you came from a perspective where you could see where ostensibly the damage that drugs do to a society, as opposed to being symptomatic of a society, did that allow you the impetus and the perspective to take a differing and unconventional view of what the relationship between societal ills and drug use may be?
Sure, that's an outstanding point. That's one of the advantages of my background, is that the people, for example, the people who we vilify as horrible drug dealers, horrible drug users oftentimes, I knew these people. These people were me, and I know that the things that were being said about them were just inconsistent with reality and also logic when you really think about it. And so it helps me to take a step back, and it helps me to remember that these people that we're saying these things about are the people I know, and I know that they are good people, hardworking people, decent people. And so it makes me question some of the things, some of the assumptions that we make about drug users, about drug sellers, and a number of things. So it's helped me to have a broader perspective. When we think about things like racial segregation that we have in the country in terms of where you live, where you work, this sort of racial segregation helps to keep many of us who are in science ignorant. It helps to keep many of us in the population ignorant, because we can have in our minds these incredible stories about these folks that is just inconsistent with logic and reality.
Let's talk specifically about those assumptions that tell us what those assumptions broadly are, and how you came about, or what was the journey that you took to begin to question those assumptions.
Well, I guess when we think about drugs, that's what the book is really about. One of the assumptions that people make about crack cocaine is that all the users are addicted, and that's just not true. There are people who use the drug. The majority of people who use the drug go to work, pay taxes, are responsible people. Other assumption: the majority of the users are white. Are black. That's not true. The majority of users are white. One hit and you're addicted. Again, that assumption is just not true. All the evidence, there is nothing, any drug that I'm aware of, that with one hit you're addicted. Just doesn't work that way. Addiction requires work. So all of these kind of assumptions I initially believed. And then I believed all of this stuff, even having my background. But when I learned how to think, I could now think about my background, the people I knew, myself, and apply this stuff more, my logic and reasoning more critically. And so the sort of things that we were told, we all were susceptible to believing that. And so in the book, I'm trying to help people to understand and see how you can question in a way that is actually useful.
Well, tell us about the Rat Park study, and how that played into your beginning to question that the relationship between, or how that began to question those assumptions.
Well, so the Rat Park study is a study in, I should back up even further. When I was an undergraduate student, I was told that drugs like methamphetamine, heroin, cocaine, if you allow an animal to self-administer these drugs, press a lever and receive injections of these drugs, they would do so until they die. Sure enough, you look at some data, that's exactly what happened. But when you look at these data more carefully, you understand that the only thing that the animal had access to in the cage was the drug. Now, if you only have access to the drug, of course, that's all you're going to do. The Rat Park studies, what it showed was that when you allow animals to have access to other animals and enriched environments, some other sort of options, they don't take these drugs to the point of death. In fact, they prefer these other options to the drugs. And so when you start to think about the environment more or alternatives in the environment more, you could start to see that the drugs are not having this unrealistic grip or hold on some people. And so from that study, thought about doing studies with humans, and we did those kind of studies with crack cocaine users, where we brought them into the laboratory and we provided alternatives to the crack cocaine use. Sure enough, they chose to take the alternatives on about half of the occasion. In this case, the alternative was $5 in cash. $5 in cash could get people to stop taking crack cocaine on about half of the occasions that they're offered the drug. If you increase that money to like $20, you can just wipe out crack cocaine, choice to take crack cocaine.
All right, yeah. Walk us through those studies, because those studies, you did the same study both for crack cocaine. You ultimately did it with methamphetamines. Just walk us through, because it's fascinating. You had people essentially living at a facility, and you were giving them the options. Just really walk us through that.
Yeah, so in these studies, of course, we have passed all the ethical requirements. So you bring people into the laboratory, and you give them an option to, you let them sample the dose of cocaine that's available for the day. And you also give them the $5, if in this case, in one case, that's available for the day. And now you give them several options throughout the day to take crack cocaine or to take the money. And what you find is when $5 in cash is the alternative, they'll take the $5 on about half of the occasions. Now, we did a similar sort of study with methamphetamine users, where we provided them with a $5 alternative and a $20 alternative. Now, when $5 was available, just like the crack cocaine, they took the drug on about half of the occasions. But when we allowed them to take drug or the $20, they never took the drug. They always took the $20. Now, some people will say, well, maybe they were just taking the money and waiting till they got out of the hospital and so they can go out and use the money to get high. Well, again, that's inconsistent with the notion that one hit of the drug, you're so driven to have another hit of the drug, you can't plan, you can't have this sort of inhibitory control. Because if they were exercising this type of inhibitory control, that's good. At least they were making plans. But I do know in many of the cases, we pay people's rent with their study earnings. We wrote the checks, or we paid other bills for them. So I know in some cases, many the people, the research participants, they didn't go out and buy drugs with the money.
And to make it clear, the money was promised, was pledged, but then it was given after the study was done. And I have to say that I couldn't help, as I was reading about that study, to contemplate the marshmallow study. I mean, I have 2 kids, and that's sort of the marshmallow study, where you put the 2 marshmallows in front of the kid, or 1 marshmallow in front of a kid, and you leave the room, and you say, if you leave the marshmallow there, we'll give you a couple more. That type of restraint, theoretically, right, that we've been told, is that drugs are just sort of the all-encompassing marshmallow for a kid.
That's right. Well, by the way, the marshmallow studies were conducted by my colleague at Columbia, Walter Michel. Absolutely, we've talked about these studies on many occasions. That's right. If you have the appropriate alternative, you can get people to inhibit their behavior. If you have options, people can inhibit their behavior if there isn't any other sort of pathological things going on. So when we think about drug addiction, people are addicted for a variety of reasons. Sometimes lack of alternatives, sometimes co-occurring psychiatric disorders like they're depressed, they're anxious, they are schizophrenic. So there's a wide range of reasons why people are addicted, but this is an important reason why people are addicted.
Well, now, so when it breaks down, I mean, is there a determining factor in terms of addiction, and or does there have to be sort of a nexus of factors that cause someone to sort of short circuit that type of long-term thinking or a reason or whatnot in pursuit of a drug?
Well, one of the things that we have to remember when we think about addiction is this fact. The vast majority of the people who use a drug, 80 to 90% of them, do not meet criteria for addiction. They don't become addicted. So that's number one. So it helps us to understand that it's not something unique about the drug. It's not the drug when the majority of the people are not addicted. Number two, we think about all of these various reasons why people can be addicted. It requires us to carefully evaluate the person's situation before making these claims about addictions. Like people make claims about genetics and so forth. There's no evidence to support that claim. And so if we make these claims, we just want to make sure people have evidence to support their claims. And so I don't know why one particular person is addicted versus the other, but if you allow me to evaluate the person, I can probably help you understand why that person's addicted.
And so, what are the why do we have these assumptions then? I mean, we've is this a failure of good science? Is it been used? I mean, obviously, the drug war has a lot of political value, and it's had, whether we've called it a drug war or we just use drugs as a way of, or drug use as a way of marginalizing people. I mean, talk to us about how that's existed through much of our history, at least in this country.
Well, drugs are excellent tools to separate us from them. We have to think about this. If we think about what was said about marijuana in the 1930s, we said that marijuana would cause someone to kill their mother if they smoked marijuana, and that was believed. We believed that sort of thing, in part because marijuana use was associated primarily with black people in the South and Mexicans, and so it allowed us to separate us from them. Then when more people started to smoke marijuana, more people start to realize that this is just cannabis, you can no longer make those kind of statements about marijuana. Like if you make those statements about marijuana today, people will look at you like you're crazy. But you still can make those statements about heroin, about crack cocaine, about methamphetamine, in part because there are so few users of those drugs that you can make these outrageous statements about them and be believed. Now, there are a number of people who benefit from this belief in these incredible effects of these drugs. Law enforcement officials benefit. Their budgets are increased because of the war on drugs. Politicians benefit in part because they can tell their constituents that they're doing something about this awful scourge. Scientists benefit because they're working on this important problem to solve the society's sort of concerns. So all of the parents benefit because they don't have to think, they don't have to teach, they don't have to tell their kids how to use these things safely if you ever use them, because unlike sex, your kids are going to have sex, so you have to say something about sex. Your kids are going to drive an automobile, so you're going to have to teach them about it. Both sex and driving are potentially dangerous activities, but we know how to keep kids safe. But you can see how all of these different sort of groups of constituents, they have an interest in continuing the hysteria surrounding drugs. The problem is there are people who are paying huge prices for this sort of ignorance that's being exchanged.
Where are those prices paid? I mean, obviously, on a society level, we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars in a war on drugs. But where else do we see the cost of that type of, I guess, Manichaean view of drugs?
Well, we just talked about my upbringing and where I come from. So when we think about the disproportionate numbers of black males, particularly who are arrested for drugs and serving times, and they have a blemish on their record because of drug charges, there are large numbers of the American population, particularly the black population where I come from, who just have no faith in the system and have no sort of interest in participating in the system. You have all of that sort of potential human resource being wasted. And not only that, we have the impression that there is lack of social racial justice, lack of confidence in a system that we all participate in.
It's fascinating anyway because the crack really, I mean, I guess just because of my age, crack really became was the first sort of drug hysteria that I was aware of. And I think that just recently there was a study that showed the whole sort of narrative about crack babies was completely fabricated on some level. And it really ties into, I mean, in New York anyways, like I associate that sort of that period of crack hysteria with like the issues of the case of the Central Park Five. It became I mean, it was used in this way. I mean, it just in sort of just massive propaganda aimed essentially at what was social ills that we were not dealing with.
Yes, and that's exactly right. So that's one of the things that happened with crack in the mid-1980s. It gave us a nice excuse for not dealing with problems, social problems, because we could say that the problem was crack. We could say that the unemployment rate was related to crack, even though the unemployment rate specifically for like black people were 20% in 1980. It never reached that high during the crack era, and it never has reached that high since. But it's still, right now, it's double that of white folks, and crack is no longer a big deal. And so you see all of these problems, they're still here, but the drug is no longer this sort of interest that we had previously.
What is the difference between crack use from that time and now? I mean, do we have a sense of whether or not the drug just fell out of favor, or that we just don't use it as the scapegoat because we don't have the same sort of social ills that we need that drug to justify?
Well, the use of crack was always very low. It was never that large. The DEA, when they did their initial studies, clearly said, that crack, their first major sort of report said that crack is not a big deal. It's only in certain cities, and other than that, it's not even used that much. It's nowhere near powder cocaine, they reported. And as I said, the use of crack cocaine was always considerably lower than powder cocaine or any other drug, always very low. So it was never really this sort of epidemic that people called it. That just simply was not true. The numbers have always been very low.
And so, I mean, talk to us a little bit about methamphetamines, because I think in the within the sort of the conventional wisdom, I mean, meth seems to function today as crack did then in terms of a narrative. Talk about that, and also, I'm curious as to what your sense is. I mean, the associations I have with meth are that they are a white rural drug, where the associations that we had with crack were that they were an urban black drug. How much of that was just sort of fictionalized, and why that change?
Well, the difference in terms of you're right when you point out that methamphetamine is the new crack. In fact, I write about that in the book. And most of the people who use methamphetamine, like any drug, are white. And the thing is, and then there are fairly low numbers of methamphetamine users around the country as well. And there are places that have gotten really crazy about methamphetamine. Crazy being that they really punish people severely for using methamphetamine. Places like Oklahoma, they really give you heavy sentences for methamphetamine use. But it's a slight difference, because there are other places like Montana who also has methamphetamine use, but they are being more progressive about the way they deal with methamphetamine. Like people who have methamphetamine infractions related to possession get no more than like a year in jail, and they get sent to treatment in the process. So they are being more progressive out there. But there was no states that were being as progressive with crack cocaine. It was At the federal level, we made for infractions related to the drug so harshly across the board, and so there are some similarities with methamphetamine and crack cocaine in terms of the hysteria. The hysteria, much of which is just not supported by evidence. They range from meth mouth to cognitive impairments associated with the drug. That stuff is just not supported by the weight of the data, just like much of the hysteria surrounding crack cocaine. That is true. But there are some important differences. I think in terms of a legislative perspective, we had not before or since punished any drug more harshly than crack cocaine.
And so so meth doesn't receive the same. I mean, in terms of usage, is there any difference between sort of the black usage of crack relative to the white usage of crack versus the black usage relative to the white usage of meth? I mean, when we talk about Montana being progressive, it just occurs to me that, like, well, they probably have the funds to do it relative to the problem, and that's the way they address it. I don't know if that's the case, but I mean, that just
yeah.
But I'm curious as to, is the nature of meth even more white than the nature of crack use?
No, you're absolutely right. You hit it on the head. When we think about crack cocaine use, there's a higher percentage of black people who use crack cocaine than like methamphetamine, for example. With methamphetamine, there's virtually no black use of methamphetamine.
Now, why is that? I mean, how does that happen? Is it just a function of the distribution mechanism? I mean, is this sort of a business question? I mean, what accounts for that?
Yeah, I mean, distribution, availability of the drug in certain communities. When we think the drug is fashionable among one group, when we think about cigarette smoking, there are virtually no black people who smoke Marlboro cigarettes, but they smoke Newport. Why is that? Well, because it's kind of faddish in the culture. That's what we do. That's what they do. The same is true with methamphetamine. It's just like it's one of these things that's what white folks do. That's not what black folks do. But you can find some black users of methamphetamine, particularly in certain gay communities in some cities.
Interesting. And I mean, with cigarettes, I mean, you can just track it by the advertising, right? I mean, some tobacco executive makes the decision that we're going to go for this market versus that market. I mean, does the same thing happen in the drug trade, or is it simply that somehow it's just easier to manufacture outside of areas where there's a bigger concentration of African Americans? I mean, I'm just curious because we have seen drug use as a way of marginalizing certain people and of using it as a scapegoat for certain societal ills. And I wonder what the idea of using meth as how that plays into that. I mean, have we seen a change in the way that we perceive societal ills in like rural areas, or I'm just curious, what's around that?
I didn't understand completely the question.
Well, I mean, if the idea is that we use drugs as a way of marginalizing people and as a way of sort of ending the conversation about certain social ills that we have that are not related to the drugs, but the drug makes it much easier for us to dismiss those social ills, and therefore we don't actually have to do the real work of addressing those. What does it say about the what's going on in our country today that meth is functioning in that manner for the white population, and we don't have that drug du jour hysteria in terms of black population?
Well, God, I don't know. That's a difficult question because I don't know if meth is functioning that way for the white population. I think we have to be clear. It's not the white population. It is specific sort of groups of white people we don't like, poor white people and gay white people. And so I think that I think that's the major sort of users or our view of methamphetamine use. If the drug is associated with these groups we don't like, it's not just across the board.
So what are the policy implications for our perspective and our use of drugs functioning as a scapegoat? I mean, obviously, there's a lot of people enriching themselves on the drug war. What is? How does it go beyond that?
Again, I'm having a difficult time hearing and understanding.
Oh, sorry about that. I guess I was asking is just what are the policy implications? I mean, once we accept the notion of drugs as not being this sort of hysterical force, it obligates society to do what at that point?
Well, all right, that's a big assumption because, I wrote the book in order to help educate people about this sort of thing, and I don't think we're there. So the society doesn't feel really obligated to do anything at this point. But once the society has gotten there, it requires that we rethink our drug policy. If the assumptions that our drug policy are built on, that drugs are so dangerous, any use of this can destroy our society, destroy the individual, it requires us to rethink this, particularly when we start to look at the fact that we have 2.3 million people behind bars these days. And we start to look at the racial disparities in terms of who's behind bars and who these penalties primarily are placed upon. It requires us to look at what we're doing and give some considerations about changing it. When we think about countries like Portugal, who have who has actually decriminalized all of their drugs, and they are faring better than us on all of the major indicators, drug use, all of these sorts of things. It requires us to look at that. But I think that people need to have better education, better information about drugs, because I think a number of people still have the view that drugs are so dangerous.
All right. Well, Professor Carl Hart, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate your talking about your book and coming on and talking to us about it.
Thank you very much, and have a good day.
You too.